From your perspective, how much is regulation and a pushback on this deal a likelihood across the US too?
Well, one interesting news point is today, Microsoft's president had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal just at 1 o'clock, um, claiming the pro-competitive reasons for the merger. So I think you'll see that this will be a big battle in DC. There was talk that it would be a likely lawsuit, but of course, you need a vote from the commissioners at the FTC before it can go out. So I think, and with international attention to the UK and EU, I think it's probable that it would go forward. It reminds me a lot of the AT&T Time Warner merger lawsuit a few years ago.
So I think this is interesting because we have to think about who might object to this. And I guess one name is Sony, right? I'm looking at the market share data. Microsoft had the second highest market share in the US 2021 for games consoles, 34.8%. Sony slightly more than that at 40%. What is the issue here? Why would Sony be upset about the idea of Microsoft buying Activision?
Right. Well, Sony is at the #1 market position at 40%. Microsoft's at second highest at 34%, and then you have Nintendo at 24%. So I guess they're concerned that Microsoft would have a competitive edge in cloud. That's an argument that you're seeing floated around.
I'm interested. Let's talk about what is in the interest of the user here. And we actually went out to our followers, to our audience who are there on Twitter. We wanted to give them a poll. We wanted to see whether they ultimately, Sarah, cared about whether Activision is owned by Microsoft or not. And it seems as though they want to see the deal go through. A cool 82% think Microsoft should be allowed to buy Activision. From your perspective, from a consumer user point, does it matter? Will they make enough concessions, do you think, to ensure that at no point me, the gamer, suffers from this?
Well, I think the consumer might be worried that their access to Call of Duty would be foreclosed on Sony's PlayStation. But even Microsoft has said that they are not in a position to want to even stop Call of Duty access on the PlayStation. And so arguments of foreclosure like that Microsoft would hold back certain games, seem to be weak. And I think the game players know that. If there's demand for Call of Duty, Microsoft and Activision would want to meet that demand.
We want to dig in here because, of course, this isn't happening in isolation. We heard earlier in the year, NVIDIA, ARM, that particular deal kiboshed. We know that this week, December the 8th, Meta is going to be going in front of the FTC, trying to be arguing its case for why it should be allowed to purchase within the VR company that produces a really hot fitness app. I'm interested whether you think ultimately we will continue to see fiercer pushback on these sorts of M&A deals.
Well, you also have the context that right now Chair Lina Khan is coming at these mergers with kind of a more activist position. Even in the Meta Within action, the FTC dropped some claims in October, and it brought the lawsuit against their internal staff recommendations. And so you see a lot of maybe more aggressive enforcement actions, but we still have to see what happens in court.
Sarah, we reported Friday, Microsoft's ready for the fight, according to sources. What does that fight look like? How many key stages are left to go before this deal closes?
Right. Well, you're going to need to see the FTC vote on the action, and then you'll see the complaint in court. And then, at least from a reference point, so I said earlier, this reminds me a lot of the AT&T Time Warner merger fight a few years ago. Well, in the end, there's so much fear mongering about foreclosure that TV channels wouldn't be offered to other networks. But 4 years later, AT&T wanted to sell off their Time Warner assets. So there's no guarantee that a merger would create anti-competitive effects. And so we'll just have to see what happens in trial and in the public eye.
Sarah, I know you're not a merger arbitrage specialist per se, but what's your assessment on the likelihood of this deal going through?
Oh, well, it's hard to say with the politics. And, I think a lot of it is depending on what the FTC is saying and what claims it brings. I think maybe they're gearing up for a long trial in court. At the end, if you see what happened with AT&T and Time Warner, there might be congressional hearings, there might be a lot of back and forth, but eventually it might go through. I mean, you don't know about the UK and the EU as well, and the 5 other countries that are looking into this merger. So to be determined.